As we draw ever closer to the end of Loki Season 2, and with it being unlikely that a Season 3 will happen, so many questions still remain to be answered in the finale of this season. Something that will likely be answered is how the TVA was originally created, and myself and many others have begun to suspect that Loki himself may have been that original spark that creates the TVA, even if he isn't the one who directly oversees its construction, though that could certainly be possible as well. So lately I've been discussing the idea that Loki will create the TVA and was in many ways the first He Who Remains, and I think this could connect to the script that we see He Who Remains show Sylvie and Loki at the end of the first season to show them that he was paving the way for both of them to finally meet face to face. Though, I wonder if there was more deception involved in that interaction than we were led to believe, and I question whether or not He Who Remains actually wrote that script in the first place, as it's interesting that there would even be a threshold in which he no longer knows what will occur. If He Who Remains was managing the flow of time, then wouldn't it stand to reason that he should have had a view of everything that would occur? Though if the TVA was something that He Who Remains or Kang simply usurped from someone else such as Loki, then it would make sense that He Who Remains would not know what happens after the script ends, as he isn't the one who wrote it. He's simply been following it just like Loki in the first season. Now that Loki has lived through those events, it's possible that Loki will go on to write the script and lay out the events as they have already happened, especially if Loki comes to the conclusion that there's no way to save the multiverse without the temporal loom. Moreover, many have also been positing that Loki appears to be taking on a similar role as Loki in the 616 comics, who was reborn not as a god of lies or mischief, but as the god of stories. This may be crucial to the finale of Loki Season 2, as Loki's ability to time-slip effectively gives him the ability to be the MCU's version of the god of stories, and Loki even says, "I can rewrite this story," before time-slipping back into the TVA at the moment Victor Timely went to suit up to retrofit the loom. Loki's ability makes him unique among all other characters we have seen thus far in the MCU, as Loki appears to have more ability to rewrite reality than anyone else, as he can truly move through time and space freely, and perhaps this will even tie into how he is able to walk onto the gangway without dying, as he is disconnected from time and space. Though, if Loki is truly being set up to take on the role as the god of stories, then perhaps Loki will go on to create the TVA that Kang and Ravonna ultimately usurp after a multiversal conflict between Kang variants. We just don't know yet as to why He Who Remains didn't know what happened beyond the threshold, and the threshold seemed to be determined by the script itself, and once the script had ended, the timeline began to branch even before He Who Remains was killed. This also makes me think that Loki could have somehow wrote the script for the timeline, as it's Loki and Sylvie that are chosen to take over for He Who Remains, and perhaps this is another example of an Ouroboros, and that Loki is always set on the path not by He Who Remains, but by himself. Loki is a being displaced from time and space and had already lived all of the events of Season 1, and we know that He Who Remains has already lied about ending the multiversal war and creating the TVA alone, as we know he at the very least had Ravonna to assist him and even commanded some sort of army. I think that He Who Remains did not build the TVA, at least not alone, nor did he win the multiversal war alone, and I imagine he likely wasn't entirely managing the timeline alone either, as he may have been following a script that was already written and left for him to follow to ensure that these events play out the way they are meant to. Loki may have had to write the script and give it to He Who Remains so that Loki can eventually return to the point in which the loom is imploding. It would fit with the Ouroboros theme of the season, with the beginning and endings of events and ideas being difficult to discern from one another, such as who actually came up with all of the ideas and inventions for the TVA, as it seems to be a combo of requiring He Who Remains, Kang, Victor Timely, OB, AD Doug, Renslayer, and of course Loki in order for the TVA to come into existence in the first place. Perhaps Loki creates the TVA and intentionally props up Kang as He Who Remains, as he believes that's the only way to truly keep the multiverse safe as the god of stories, and that he can oversee He Who Remains. I've seen some channels speculate that Loki is still somehow controlling everything, and maybe that is the case, and he is controlling everything from behind the scenes as the god of stories. The primary point of evidence people have pointed to is that when Miss Minutes shows Renslayer the recording of Renslayer and Kang talking after winning the multiversal war, the design on the floor in the recording is different than the design on the floor in the current Citadel. It's a very subtle detail that a lot of people could easily miss. And while this could simply be a set design error, perhaps this actually is a very subtle hint that there is an illusion at play. Maybe an illusion so powerful only someone who is a master at crafting stories could create. We did see old Loki create a very powerful illusion in Season 1, and it's safe to say this Loki may become, or already is more powerful than that Loki. Moreover, it's been reported that the events that play out in this season were always originally planned to play out in the entirety of Season 1, and I think it would be fitting if Loki were truly behind the TVA and He Who Remains in some way, as so many people were convinced Loki was behind everything from the start, and it would be pretty awesome if that still turned out to be ultimately true, albeit in a different manner than many predicted. Regardless of whether or not Loki is truly taking on the role as the god of stories, or whether or not he did actually write the script that He Who Remains follows, it's likely that Loki will lose or be incapacitated in some fashion, as Kang is going to rise up and be the next MCU big bad. Maybe Loki is the god of stories and did indeed write the script that He Who Remains follows. Though it could also be possible that He Who Remains will dominate Loki and make the god of stories bend the knee to the multiversal conqueror. Though Loki has evolved much as a character, how fitting would it be to see Kang force Loki to kneel before him, just as he has tried to force so many others to submit to him. Maybe he is the god of stories now, but maybe he still doesn't have as much control over this tale as we'd like to think. After all, Kang is a con man. This we know. He conned Loki and Sylvie into believing they had a choice in that citadel. He conned the TVA into believing in the Timekeepers, he conned Ravonna Renslayer into believing she would lead with him, and he conned the universe and his own variants. Loki will likely help write the story, but Kang is the one who will take credit for it.